So thank you for joining us. At this point, I am delighted to welcome my friend, Mr. David Maxham.
How
Hey
you
there,
doing?
Mr. Maxham.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So let's begin with a really beautiful question that I think I share with the questioner. So thank you for asking it. It relates to friendship in family, and so the question is as follows: the description of friendship as a loving voice of admonishment and encouragement, a second conscience almost. I kept thinking about how I hope my sons can be that for each other. We have six sons, and I dream that they'll be each other's dear friends in adulthood. But in the meantime, there's all the quarrels and pranks and elbows and room sharing that male childhood is made of. Do you have any ideas on how to foster brother-based friendships amid the busy routine of family life? How can we foster their friendships? And that's the question. So something that I'd love to hear more from my own household as well. Sometimes you want to see the kids being dear friends to each other, but then the reality sets in, and you get the mom or dad, this that or the other happens. So what's your guidance on that?
Yeah, so a couple things. As is, I guess, in line with the topic, I asked a couple friends for advice on this question because we got it beforehand. One piece of advice, actually, from a alumnus, was who has a bunch of brothers, was, and he's the oldest, or sorry, second oldest brother, was being able to look at other examples of other families. So he said, when I was sophomore or junior in high school, you know, I forget if it was his dad or mom said to him, "Hey, look at that family over there. See how they get along so great." And the older brother is a real mentor to him and helping him out with things. They go and play soccer to get like, forget, your younger brother Joe for a second, right? Like, wouldn't that be a nice thing for you to have, right? And it was like, yeah, you know what? Like, I should spend more time with my younger brother, right? I want to be there. And another, when this student had mentioned that, made me think of another. It's hard to not say people's names, but made me think of another alumnus who, his father told me the same thing a year or two ago, which was, he was a senior, and he said, "Hey, think about this year especially, how you want your siblings to remember you, because this is the last time you're going to be living here with everybody, right? Most likely you're going on to college, and really think about what it is, what's that last mark you want to remember you by, right? Do they want to remember you as the guy who was never home and was just always going out? Oh, I'm too busy for you. Or, man, my older brother, man, like, he was there for me when I needed him. He made sure to spend time with me. If you're a younger sibling, you know how cool it was when you're older. I have an older sister. She was like, "Hey, do you want to go to see a movie? I don't care what it is." Yes, I do. Right. Like, absolutely, I do. It was cool, right? For her to ask me to do something, and wasn't super common, but ever she wanted to include me in something, I was very eager to do so because I looked up to her, and she was older, and you got that whole thing going on. So, um, in any case, with one of the things we're talking about, right, is juniors and seniors in particular was what my talk was about, but that rang very true with me, that being able to really think about who is the person you want to be, right? Either from looking at examples of other people, but just yourself. Like, yeah, I want to be the person that my younger siblings really look up to and trust. And this is a really, and I mean, if you're trying to talk to your son about it, sons don't always respond immediately to lectures when, talking about things specifically, but you tell them, like, look, this is a relationship you're going to have for the rest of your life. So, if you can figure out how to deal with your brother being a little bit annoying, right? And you don't want to bring him to the movies, or you don't want to go bring him to play soccer or whatever, because that's a pain in the butt. And yeah, he's a little bit annoying, and he's awkward, but like, think about what you're really investing in here, right? Like, he'll be there for the rest of your life. And that's something that you don't want to squander, that, I think that's probably a good frame for that.
I like that. How would you adjust it then? Let's say, hypothetically, somebody's, um, I think sometimes when the kids get to, I don't know, middle school, high school, you start to see those friendships developing. You have those moments, you catch those glimpses, and it's like, wow, hold on a second. There's actually a beginning friendship here, and maybe a minute or so, and then you're back into the fray and kind of the maelstrom. But I'd imagine for younger families, maybe a older boy just coming to the Heights next year or something like that, it can be tougher to see that because it's kind of this never ending scrum of like elbows and disagreements, shall we say. So how would you counsel kind of a parent of a younger set of guys to set their sons up for friendship? And partly I guess we don't want to overthink it, but I'm sure there's some things that we can put in place to help a younger crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it very largely depends on whether you're talking about them having friendship with their older siblings or younger siblings or same age or or similar in age. Like those are all kind of going to look different. They have different shapes. With a younger sibling, you might say, hey, cool your jets a little bit, like don't, or, learn how to be artful in the way that you encounter, adults, but then also like an older sibling or whatever. Like, don't just go and jump into his room or, find a good time to talk to him, right? Like those types of, practical advice type things you can do. For younger kids, I think it's just a matter of finding, I mean, this is related even to older guys, but finding activities they can do together that are fun, right? So
Yeah.
if you want your, sophomore and junior in high school to be good friends with your 8-year-old, right? Like I have an oldest son, and then I have 3 daughters in a row, and then I have a younger son. So I have a 14-year-old and a 6-year-old, right? And so that can be difficult, right? But like, what do they have in common and things like that, right? But if you can talk to the older one and say, hey, like, what's something that you would like to do with, and my son's name is Leo, right? So, hey, David, what do you want to do with Leo? Oh, well, I don't know. He's poor. Okay, well, what's like a treat that you could do, right? Like, do you want to go to the movies? Like, that's fun, right? Like, and then we'll bring him along, right? Or, we can go. So like, try to make it into a reward or a treat or something like that they can do together. And then like, you're going to give them some money to do it, or you're going to buy a cool game for them to play. And, for my 3 girls that are all near each other, obviously close in age. So one thing that we've done is really looking out for activities they can all do together. So, buying a particular board game that they all want to play with each other, or, especially if you can get the oldest one, like, hey, what's a game you would like to play with them? I'll buy it. Oh, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to get something out of this, right? And in return, the expectation, I'm going to actually play it with my siblings or whatever, right? Like, so if you can kind of engage them in I'm willing to do anything to help you, right? Like, that's kind of the principle of subsidiarity on its smallest level, right? Like, how can you as a parent really facilitate that relationship? Like, what's missing here, right? Like, my oldest daughter is Lucy. Lucy, what's getting in the way of you being friends with Marianne? Well, I don't know. I just hate her, right? Like, that's not going to happen. It's like, well, she's annoying, or I don't have anything else to do, right? Like, oh, okay. So like, what's something that I could do to help you, right? Like, and kind of get their view on it, because then they have to kind of eat their own words, right? They're like, if it's, well, there's nothing fun to do. Like, she doesn't like playing the same games I do, or whatever. Okay, well, let's ask her if she would want to play this game. I mean, it's very oftentimes happens my house where the youngest of those 3, Kiara, will come in and say, no one wants to play with me. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, Lucy, you won't play a game with her? And she's like, well, she's embarrassed to say to me what she probably said to her, which wasn't very nice, right? And I'm guessing with boys, it might be a little bit different, but I think there's a certain shamefulness that kids will feel if you call them out on being unloving towards their siblings, right? Again, that might not always be the case, but that's been my experience where, I teach high school boys all the time. And if I said to any of them when their sibling wasn't there, like, hey, do you want to have a good relationship with them? Like, do you love your brother? Like, of course. Yeah. Okay. I do. Right. Like, they might not want to admit it in front of the other person, in front of mom, but, usually in front of dad or in front of another teacher, right? Someone else, like, yeah, of course. Like, that it's shameful to say you don't love your brother, that you don't care for him. Right.
Yeah.
So like, kind of making them aware of those things by, I think, pointing it out, right? Like, do you really love him? Yeah, you do. Right. So think about that, right? Don't just give him a hard time all the time. Those types of things are helpful, I think.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. I love the idea of the board games and the individual mentorship, and just having things that allow your children to enjoy something together.
Right.
It's a card game or a trip, something along those lines. That makes.
I mean, even for sports, we're like, hey, I'll get you guys a brand new soccer ball. Yeah. And a nice net or something, right? Like, that's something that the older kid or whatever might really enjoy playing with. And then you guys can play together, right? Like, oh, okay, cool. Like, that's right. It's not like you don't have to say it to them as a quid pro quo, right? But it gets them excited about doing that activity, right?
Yeah. And isn't there something about I mean, maybe in a way, kind of the scrum that you like. I think of my own childhood with my brothers, and we just kind of, there was like this, Tasmanian devil of boys, floating around wrestling. Um, in a way, isn't that itself like the shared activity that will bind them in friendship someday?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think the physical activity of them roughhousing and getting all that type of stuff, getting into trouble from time to time, all those types of things. I think that's certainly true. I think what the questioner, I think, is probably concerned about is the unkind, uncharitable
Yeah.
comments that aren't just kind of friendly ribbing, right? But like, no, you're bullying him, right? Like you're not being nice right now. Like, come on, relax, right? And I think that can happen where boys are trying to, you know, she said the sharp elbows, right? It's like, okay, come on. Like, I know you can use your strength to push out the younger guys and whatever else, or, push out whoever the weaker of the guys, and people like doing that. But I think there is a concern that it can get to be overbearing, right? And then the kid just kind of shuts down or doesn't feel like the older brother doesn't like him enough, right? And that's like something a younger brother's never going to say to his older brother, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's never going to say like, hey, you're being really mean to me and I feel like unloved by you, right? Like, like there's like a shamefulness that is kind of built into there where people won't say those things. So I think it's up to a parent to recognize that and communicate those desires to the other boys, right? Like, hey, come on, you guys, we don't treat each other like this in our family. We gotta work on this, right? And then really hold your boys accountable, right? Like, or girls or whatever, right? Like, if they're being mean to each other, don't allow that, right? Like, if it crosses your line, right? I think parents are sometimes not quick enough to, like, don't let your kids do something that cause you to dislike them, right? Like, that's like a Jordan Peterson quote, I think, right? It's like, if your kids are doing something that you think, right, you honestly think is a really mean and uncharitable thing that you don't think is ever acceptable, like, hold them to account on that, right? Like, no, I really care so much about you guys growing in friendship that I'm going to have consequences when you do something to betray that. Like, that is not at all how we treat each other, right? And then obviously the flip side of that is to exactly your point, right? Like, when they're roughhousing, having a good time, whatever else, like, relax, right? Like, if they're having a good time and roughhousing, they break something accidentally or something like that, like, you can't come super hard down, right? You got to realize, like, okay, they're having a good time, they're having fun. I'm going to be understanding and generous, right, towards this, because I understand that this is part of what I need to deal with and suffer because I'm allowing them to have a good relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Awesome.
And then one last thing I wanted to say about that is having I gave a little bit of idea of like a reward, but also just like work-related activities that they can do. Like, hey guys, if you can figure out how to put together this bookshelf or, whatever in the next half hour without fighting, I'll give you $5. Or, something that is, or collecting firewood is one of the faculty members at the Heights has his sons do. Like, hey guys, you can collect firewood if you want to, but you don't have to, but here's a small monetary gain or whatever that you can have. And that can be a collaborative working experience, right? I think especially boys do well when they have something that they're working towards and goal oriented. And of course you can get bickering and stuff, but you just put that as part of the deal, right? Like, hey guys, you got to figure this out. No bickering. If you can figure that out and you put it all together, or, got a new shed that has to be put together or a lawnmower or something. I mean, it's gonna be different for different levels, and there's some small, or I'm going to bring you out for ice cream afterwards, or, something like that. That can be a good way for them to have motivation. Like, hey guys, we actually have to get along here. Otherwise we're not going to watch the movie tonight, or, whatever it is. So.
Yeah, no, that's great. The common objective. That's great.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. We have another question about, I think, tangentially related to friendship, but I think also maybe asked of you in your capacity as a teacher and a particular science and math teacher. But it kind of relates to what seems to be the young man's disposition to move just a bit slowly through life, and he oftentimes doesn't finish his test. Like, he does well in the problems that he does on tests, but oftentimes many of the problems are not even addressed because he's moving at kind of his own pace. And it seems like that's also visible on the home front as well, with a little bit of lethargy and just kind of being comfortable at maybe a more contemplative disposition. I'd imagine this is probably also reflected in friendship as well. Maybe just kind of a little bit of a loner, which is not entirely a bad thing, I'd imagine. But how would you counsel this parent to help her son with his pace of life?
Yeah, that's it. That's a very good question. I think one that I'm intimately familiar with. Uh, I think so I think the problem that oftentimes can happen is your son's doing something slowly, not quickly enough or whatever. And you're like, come on, like do it faster or whatever. And they're like, okay, like I'm not going to though. Right. Like what are you supposed to do about that? Right. Like similar to what I said before is I think giving them, right, the teacher's job or, a parent's job in this example, we were trying to have someone improve is to give them steps that are achievable. Right. And we've talked about this in regards to math before and whatnot, but like your son has to have a sense of mastery. He has to have a sense interiorly, not just based off exterior motivation, right? But like interiorly, hey, I'm getting better at this. I'm actually advancing, right? If someone is doing reading, for instance, right? And like, they're never getting any better at it. They know they're not getting any better at it. They don't feel as if they are. They're not going to want to put in the work to sound the letters out. Wherever you can't make your kids sound letters out. Like, you just can't do it, right? You can make them sit down with you for a half hour every night, but they can just not do it, right? You want to make sure, like, if you're trying to say, hey, get faster, right? Try to find an area in their life where you think it's eminently possible for them to do the task quicker or more quickly, right? And then try to use a carrot approach, right? Like, hey, I think you could do this faster. How about if you finish this in, let's set it, I think setting a clock or I personally do that all the time. I just had to grade a bunch of papers earlier today and I set my phone up and I said, okay, I'm going to try to get as many, I'm going to see how long it takes me to do each paper, right? And just the fact that I'm measuring it, I'm like, ooh, it was like 2:30 to start with. And I was like, I got it down to like 2. And I was like, yeah, look at me, I'm getting better at it, right? And it makes me, it's a little bit of accountability, right? So I don't just kind of daydream and wander, get distracted by something else. I see that clock running, right? I'm like, okay, no, I'll go to 20 minutes, right? And then I'll stop. So a clock where they can see that. And then also where you can try to help hold them accountable. Hey, how long do you think this activity should take you? Okay, let's set a clock for, 10 minutes or whatever. And let's see if we can get it done in 10 minutes or push back a little bit. I think 8, right? Do you think maybe 8? Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's do 8. Right. And then just a matter of holding them accountable, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily, I'm going to give you ice cream if you do this, right? But it can just be the verbal back and forth. I'm going to help you here. I'm going to be your partner, right? And this is about establishing friendship with your son, right? Like, I'm your friend. I'm going to try to help you out here. And I see that you're not doing things as quickly as you should. So I'm going to try to help you with this. And you can even ask your son, what are ways that I could try to help? What do you think is really getting in the way of you doing things more quickly? And I want to try to help you. How can I do that? Yeah. I mean, my one daughter takes forever to do we have after dinner chores where they switch around or whatever, and she just is always super happy-go-lucky kid. And she'll like skipping around and she's making sounds or whatever. And it's like, just clean the table. Like, just take the things from the table and put them over here. And she's like, oh yeah, got it. And then she'll go back over and start like spinning or whatever. She's very little. Okay. But just the other night, my wife said to her, okay, do you want me to help? Like, Cecilia, I can set an alarm for you. And she went on the oven and she's like, yeah, that would be helpful, Mom. Thanks. And then she went, okay, 2 minutes. Let's see if we can do it in 2 minutes. And she was like, yeah, okay, got it. And then like she went and she did it, right? But it was just her helping hold her accountable. Like, hey, do you want me to set an alarm for you? I can do that. And that way it will be like a little game. Like, can you beat it? And whatever. So I think that playfulness and finding what things actually work for your son or daughter. And I think that happens with a conversation, right? Like, what is it actually that's getting where? Are you getting distracted? Do you just feel slow, right? I think one thing that completely goes unspoken of a lot is just making sure a kid gets enough sleep, right? From a practical perspective, a lot of people aren't sleeping enough these days. So everybody's in a different situation. I get that, but look at that, right? I mean, sometimes parents don't realize, like, okay, I had a kid, it was like 2 or 3 years ago at the Heights, and I taught him first period, and he was just always super slow. And I remember bringing this up to the mother. I said, yeah, I don't know what's going on. He's really slow. And she was like, yeah, I don't know either. But, he gets sleep. We got home at like 1. And then like we said prayers together, and that took 45 minutes. And then he went to bed at 2. So I think he should be fine. And I'm like, no, he's not. Like, if he's sleeping from 2 to 5:30 or 6, which is what like, that's not enough. And she was like, really? I was like, yeah, no, like, he's a growing young man, right? Like, I can't get that man. Like, there's no way that's a good, right? So that's something that to think about, is making sure your son's getting enough sleep, that they're eating proper nutrition, right? So these are all just like basic types of things that can go over. I'm not saying that's the problem in this particular case, right? But just double checking, right? Like, okay, what's his nutrition? Is he getting enough sleep? Maybe you think he's getting enough sleep, but I mean, this happens to my son. He goes in his room and then, Dave, did you go to sleep on time last night? Nah, I went to bed, but okay, you were reading or whatever. You stayed up too late. Let's talk about that, right? So I think just touching base on those type of very practical bodily things, and then following up with the more kind of techniques of good time management.
Yeah, I like that, and it kind of gets to the question of figuring out what aspects of the personality are just temperament, and maybe he's just kind of a Ferdinand the bull, and he doesn't want to be out there bucking his head all day long with the other bulls. He wants to be more contemplative, and there's a goodness to that. But then on the other side, you've got questions of motivation, and certainly some of those physical aspects that you mentioned. Also, just what are some of the other inputs of it? Oftentimes you find that a great way to decrease the GPA is to make sure that there's electronic devices easily accessible. Those can definitely lead to a decrease in motivation. So
one thing about that also too, I think you bring up a very good point there about the Ferdinand the Bull type thing, is I think you should be very careful not to kind of embarrass your son or not affirm that there are many good things about this, right? Like, I mean, all the time, I'm telling kids to do the opposite, right? Don't hand your tests in so quickly. Take your time. It's not a race. I just gave administered a final this morning, and I kept saying over, guys, it's not a race. You're going to have plenty of time. Just take it easy, right? And of course, there's a couple kids, but they're usually a minority that are going too slow, right? Usually boys that I teach are just like racing to get it done. Fine, I'm done, right? Like, look at me, I did it faster, right? Like boys are oftentimes doing that type of thing. So I think it is really good and essential to tell your son, like, hey, it is really good that you don't race through things, that you're really careful, and that's a really good thing, and is going to help you a lot in life in these types of arenas. It's just for this type of thing, these type of activities, we got to try to get you going a little faster. I'm the debate coach at the Heights, and this is one thing I talk about all the time. I have a lot of really smart kids, and they're just slow, right? So someone asks them a question in cross-examination, and they're like, okay, you're right. And if you gave it to them for an assignment to do that night, they would research it, they get all their things, they would ask other people, and they'd have a great answer to give you, right? And it would be better than the answer for the quick kid, right? But the quick kid gives an answer in that moment that is better, because they just are like, yeah, whatever, I'm just going to tell you what I think, right? So I try to tell the boys in debate, like, it's not a good or bad thing that you're a slower or faster thinker. Just some people are fast thinkers or quick to speak, right? And I'm sure you can figure out which one I am. And so some people are slow thinkers, right? And they're going to take their time. They're going to really, oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, let me stop and think about it. I'll get back to you later about that. There's something to think about. We all know there's two different types of people out there and the way that they approach those things. And it's not that one's better or worse. It's just that, especially for the guys on debate team that are slow thinkers, I have to explain to them, hey, this is really good. What are we going to do about this now? Okay, so in your time, when you're slow thinking, you're going to want to make sure you write out exactly what your responses are to different things and exactly how you're going to respond to these things, and really play it out in your mind when you're at home, so that when you have that question that's asked, you don't have to try to come up with something on your feet. You already have something you've thought about, you've planned it out, you've figured it out, right? So prepare, right? If you're a slow thinker, spend that time preparing so that you're not caught off balance, and then you don't have to figure it all out right at the moment.
Right. No, that's great. I'm also putting in the chat here just a book recommendation. It's called Boys Adrift by Leonard Sachs, and he talks a lot about some of the things that are affecting boys, and in particular, he devotes a lot of time to the lack of motivation, and there's a lot of extrinsic factors that we might not be aware of. So that's a book to check out if motivation is an issue for your son. Great. And there are no further questions, Mr. Maxham, but I realize now I forgot to ask the one that I meant to start with, which was, when we hit stop on our conversation, was there anything that you wish you had mentioned or wish you had emphasized that you'd like to take a crack at here?
Wow, that's yeah. I mean, I've thought of like 1,000 things.
He was top 500.
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, I think we cover most of what we need to cover, but really more than anything, I want to make sure people understand that friendship really is the most important thing. It's the most important thing. And what did I was just thinking about this last night? What does St. John say over and over and over again? Love one another, right? If only they could love one another, right? What does Christ say? I give you a new commandment to love one another, right? That you should love one another, right? These are like over and over and over again. What does that mean, right? That is friendship. And one thing I didn't bring up in the talk, which I wanted to point out, was that like in the ancient languages, this is so much more obvious because the word for friendship is love, right? Like there's amo, amare, right? And there's amicitia, right? Like, oh, okay, that's the same thing, right? Like, and the same thing happens in Greek, right? But in English, we have one word for love and we have another word for friendship. And so they're not etymologically related. And so I think we sometimes don't have as deep of a connection between those two words as we should. And like, they should be like, co-equal ideas, right? If I love someone, I am friends with them, or like that's how it should work, right? That there's a root connection between these two ideas. And sometimes I think in English, because they're not etymologically related, they're separated concepts. And we have to get past that until we realize like the entire thing, right? Like you could rephrase, right? The commandment, right? As be friends with one another, right? That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be friends with God. We're supposed to be friends with one another. When St. John, at the end of his life, they say, right, all he would say to people is love one another, right? That was like just over and over and over again. Like, tell us about all the theology, wherever. He's like, love one another, right? That just is be friends. And so like just really seeing that connection between friendship and what our ultimate purpose here on earth is, which is to grow in love for one another. And of course, love for our Lord, which we can only have love for our Lord through our ability, like, how do we learn to love our Lord, right? By loving the people that are around us. So like and vice versa, right? This is this great thing that goes back and forth, right? The contemplative and all that type of stuff. So anyway, I think that I really want to make sure people understand how connected friendship and love, and like they're really the same thing. So
I love it. I never thought of that. That's very, very cool to think about. I think whenever we talk about these topics, oftentimes the Greek comes up with different types of love, and you hear about friendship of pleasure, utility, etc. But the Latin word I never considered. So that's really neat, and it does remind me that Christ tells his disciples, I'm not calling you slaves anymore, you're now friends. And he shows them what that friendship looks like by in part by washing their feet. And so maybe just in response again to that question about the younger boys, it's just continuing to teach by the example that I'm sure is fully present in the house. And sometimes you don't bear the fruit of that until you don't see the fruits until many years down the line. But just that washing of the feet to the millions of generous things that these parents do for their kids, I think in time that bears fruit in some pretty beautiful friendships. But
that's actually a really good point, I think. And I want to add on to that, just to be more specific, right? If you want your older son to play a game with your younger son, hey, why don't you guys play Clue, right? Like you could model that, right? You could just go play Clue, not every night, of course, because we have other things, but like model that behavior of playing with the other kids. And then the older kids are like, well, okay, if dad in his busy life and everything else he's doing is playing games with their kids, like I'm not too big, right, to do that, right? And I think that's always my retort to people like, oh, you should be friends with your students. I'm like, really? Like, I'm supposed to be friends with Christ, God, right? But like, my friends aren't supposed to be friends with, like, my students aren't supposed to be friends with me. Like, if they're supposed to be friends with our Lord, obviously they should be friends with me. Like, I'm not too far distant from them, and we should be really careful about not having by trying to establish like too great of a kind of professional distance or whatever between people that we're living our lives with, right? And it's same. I mean, I know that was something I had to learn as a father, especially was like, okay, I gotta figure out how to be a part of their lives and to model that type of behavior for my older sons, for everybody else in the family. Like, yeah, this is what we do with each other, right? We play with each other, we spend time with each other, we really listen. When I come home and I'm tired and whatever else, my daughter wants to tell me what she did today, and I'm like, okay, can you just get the sentence out? Like, okay, I'm gonna be patient. Okay, what's going on? Oh, and then what did you do? You did that? Oh, you jumped rope. Okay, great. It's very easy for us to lose patience and just kind of, okay, fine, thank you, and move away. And other people are very natural at it. It's not something that comes naturally to me. And I think as I've grown better at that, I've noticed immediately the change in the way that my family relates to one another. It's really such a strong connection between that. Like if I become more patient, or I become better at time management or more organized, I instantly see my son is now more organized and he's more whatever. And I'm not saying that's always going to be the case, but I just noticed that for myself when I start improving on those things and I start caring about them myself, I see my kids start to overall, generally speaking, start to excel in those areas. You're still on mute, I think.
Thank you. That's my once a webinar tradition. Got to do that once, just so everybody knows it's live. No, that's great. That's a fantastic place to end it. So, David, thanks so much for the podcast, and thanks for this extended conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks to all the guests for coming by. This is great.
Absolutely. And so, folks, next week's podcast is going to be Mr. Joe Cardenas, head of our mentoring program. He'll talk about how we as parents can coach our kids through their summer, and just help them be more purposeful in how they use their free time to form their will. We hope also to have another follow-up webinar for that conversation probably next Friday. We'll have that on the forum. So if you want to come by, you're very, very welcome. Thanks for joining us, and wish everybody a great weekend. Farewell. See you, David.
Bye, guys.